I'm a 32-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, my family has treated my home like it's a free hotel. It started innocently, as these things often do. I moved into my own place about 6 years ago, and from the beginning, I wanted it to feel open and welcoming. Family could stop by, stay a night or two if they needed, and I didn't think too much of it. I was in a decent financial spot, and it felt good to have a space where people could feel comfortable. But over the years, my house somehow transformed into a full-blown family retreat. My mom, especially, has always been the biggest cheerleader for family gatherings. She's the type who believes family should always stick together, no matter what. Her idea of family bonding often means big dinners, lots of time together, and barely any sense of personal space. So she started encouraging siblings, cousins, even my parents' friends, to stop by my place whenever they felt like it. It's just a quick visit, she'd say, and it's good for everyone to be close. At first, it was manageable. Visits would be short, and I tried to make it work. But gradually, the frequency and length of these stays began to escalate. My siblings, who live in smaller apartments and have their own space issues, started popping by without much notice, bringing their kids along, or worse, inviting their friends for a weekend getaway. It wasn't just a couple of nights here and there anymore. It was weekend after weekend of a packed house. I barely had time to myself, and my quiet, cozy home turned into a chaotic family hub, with people coming and going as they pleased. There was one specific weekend that stands out in my mind. I had just come home from a long week at my new job, a role that's a major step up for me and demands a lot more focus and time. And the moment I walked in, I could see the entire family had practically taken over. Not only were all the guest rooms occupied, but there were people lounging on my couch, snacks all over my coffee table, and toys scattered everywhere. My fridge, stocked up for the week, was practically empty, and nobody seemed to even notice. When I found my favorite coffee mug chipped and my living room carpet stained, I felt something snap inside. Every visit came with hidden costs. Food was disappearing faster than I could replenish it, my utility bills spiked, and every so often, small things would break. My guests would apologize half-heartedly, or more often than not, just leave without a word. Each time I had to replace something or pay extra, I felt a pinch in my bank account. But when I brought this up to my family, it was like I was speaking a different language. My mom brushed it off, saying, "It's family, you can't put a price on that," and my siblings just joked about my fancy house as if it was only fair that I cover the extra costs. My privacy became a thing of the past. I'd find people going through my kitchen cabinets, helping themselves to my toiletries, and using my personal items. It felt as if I was invisible in my own home. And the worst part was, whenever I tried to gently bring it up, my concerns were dismissed. My mom had this knack for redirecting the conversation, saying things like, "You're lucky to have family around. You'd be lonely without us." I could feel my patience wearing thin, but at the same time, I didn't want to create a rift. My family means a lot to me, and I didn't want to be the selfish one. A few weeks ago, I tried to set a gentle boundary. I asked my mom if family members could give me a bit of notice before stopping by. I explained that my work was getting more intense, and I needed time to unwind at home without unplanned visits. She just looked at me and said, "Oh, don't be silly. We're family, you don't need space from us." Then came the straw that broke the camel's back. One of my siblings invited a couple of friends to stay at my place without even asking. They showed up with bags in tow, ready for a mini vacation. And when I asked why they hadn't told me, they looked at me like I was the unreasonable one. "You've got the space," they said, as if that settled it. That weekend, I barely slept, and I couldn't even find a quiet corner in my own house. The minute they left, I walked through my house, looking at the mess left behind, and feeling like I didn't recognize my own home anymore. That night, I sat down with a friend who knows about my family dynamics. She listened to everything, every complaint I bottled up, and finally said, "You don't have to do this. It's your home, and they're taking advantage of it." Hearing it out loud gave me a strange sense of relief. It was like someone had finally given me permission to feel the way I already did. I realized then that something had to change. My family might not take it well, but I was tired of being the free stay whenever they wanted. I needed my home back, my space to recharge, and my peace of mind. So I made a decision. I was going to set some real boundaries this time, ones they couldn't ignore or brush off. As much as I dreaded it, I knew I had to lay down some ground rules. The open door policy was officially over. Update 1. Ace. After talking it over with my friend, I sat down and drafted a list of rules for family visits. This wasn't easy, and I knew it would cause some waves, but I was done with the revolving door of unannounced guests. I named the document house rules and tried to keep everything straightforward, so there wouldn't be any misunderstandings. The first rule, no short notice visits. I'd need at least 2 weeks notice before anyone showed up, no exceptions. Next, I added a guest limit. My home wasn't built to host an entire army. Each family could bring only a limited number of people, and unannounced extra guests weren't welcome anymore. I also included a clause about financial contributions. If they wanted to stay for more than a couple of days, they'd need to pitch in for food and utilities. This wasn't easy to write, but it felt like the bare minimum if I was going to protect my space. Once I had it all down, I sent a group message to my family, attaching the document with a short explanation. I tried to keep it polite. Something like, "Hey, I've decided to set some rules for future visits so we can all have a great time together without any stress. Please take a look and let me know if you have any questions." Then, I hit send and waited for the fallout. It didn't take long. Within minutes, my phone lit up with calls and messages. My mom was the first to respond, calling almost immediately. She sounded shocked, as if I'd just announced I was moving to the other side of the planet. "Family comes first," she said. I could practically hear the disappointment in her voice. She went on, talking about how she thought I wanted to be close to everyone, and that it was important to keep family ties strong. She didn't even try to understand where I was coming from. The whole call was about how I'd changed and how disappointed she was that I'd lost sight of family values. When I got off the phone with her, my siblings started texting one after another. They weren't happy. either. The messages ranged from mildly annoyed to downright angry. They thought the rules were unfair and selfish, accusing me of acting like I was better than them because I had a bigger house. One of them even mentioned how they had helped me out when I first moved into this house, implying that I somehow owed them unlimited access in return. Some relatives dug into the guilt trip angle, bringing up times they'd been there for me in the past. They pointed out how family was supposed to be there for each other unconditionally, trying to make me feel like a villain for setting boundaries. It stung, but I kept thinking back to that weekend where I came home to a house full of people and a chipped mug. This wasn't about turning my back on family, it was about reclaiming my own space. As expected, my friends were a huge support. A few of them had gone through similar issues, so they understood why I was doing this. They reminded me I wasn't being unreasonable, and that if my family really cared about me, they'd respect these basic boundaries. It helped me stay grounded, even when my family kept piling on the guilt. The first real test of the new rules came sooner than I thought. Just a few days after I sent the message, one of my siblings tried to pull the old drop by last-minute trick. They called that morning, saying they were in the area and would swing by that afternoon with their kids. I reminded them of the 2-week notice rule, and they didn't take it well. I was calm but firm, telling them they'd need to reschedule according to the new rules. There was a long, heavy pause, and then they exploded. They accused me of being heartless and forgetting where I came from. The call ended with them hanging up on me. The next day, my mom called again, trying a different approach. She said she was hurt that I was closing myself off from family, and went as far as to threaten that she'd never come over if I kept enforcing the rules. It felt like an ultimatum, but I didn't back down. I told her I understood her feelings, but that these rules were staying. There was a tense silence before she hung up. Over the next few days, I started hearing from extended family, cousins, aunts, people who usually stayed out of these things. Some were on my side, saying they understood why I'd set the rules, and a few even admitted they'd wanted to do the same in their own homes. Others, however, sided with my mom, saying that family should always be welcome, no matter what. I appreciated the support, but the criticism still stung. Then there was the sibling group chat. It exploded with messages about the new rules. Most of them were angry or sarcastic, with comments like, "Guess we have to book in advance for family now," or "Didn't realize you were running a hotel." They kept going on about how unnecessary the rules were, and how they never thought I'd do something like this. I didn't respond. I knew that anything I said would just fuel the fire. Reading through those messages, I realized something important. I'd let this happen by never setting limits before. I'd been the one to always keep my door open, even when it meant sacrificing my peace. As much as it hurt to see my family react this way, I knew I couldn't go back to the old way. I had to stick to the rules, no matter how much they pushed back. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly in control of my own life. The door was still open for family, but on my terms. Update 2. After sending out the new rules, things got tense. A lot of my family members went silent, no texts, no calls, nothing. It was clear they weren't thrilled, but I didn't expect some of them to completely cut off communication. At first, I thought maybe they just needed time to cool off. But days passed and the silence stretched on. Then the guilt trip started. My mom began sending these passive-aggressive texts, all about how I was missing out on family memories. She reminded me of how I used to be the glue that held everyone together, and how much everyone missed having a place to gather. Each message was a carefully worded dig, and I could tell she was trying to make me second-guess my decision. One message even ended with, "You'll look back one day and regret pushing us all away." Things got weirder when I noticed my siblings posting on social media. They were putting up these vague, passive-aggressive posts about family abandonment, and how some people change when they have more than others. They never mentioned my name, but it was obvious who they were talking about. The likes and supportive comments from extended family members just made it worse. I tried to ignore it, but every time I checked my feed, there it was, a new post or comment implying that I was the bad guy for setting boundaries. One evening, while I was finally unwinding after a long day, there was a knock on my door. I checked through the peephole and saw my youngest sibling standing there with a couple of bags. No prior message, no heads up. Just standing there, looking like they expected to be let in. I opened the door but kept it halfway, and when they tried to walk in, I gently but firmly stopped them. I reminded them of the 2-week notice rule and said I'd be happy to host them another time. They looked shocked, clearly not expecting me to actually follow through with the rules. After a moment of awkward silence, they left, mumbling something under their breath. The next day, my mom showed up. She didn't even bother calling ahead. She just came to my doorstep. She looked serious and didn't waste any time. Right there on the front porch, she accused me of being cold and heartless. She couldn't believe I was willing to shut out my own family like this. She said that family should always come first, no matter what, and that I was making everyone feel unwelcome. Her words were sharp, almost rehearsed, and she wasn't holding back. I stayed calm and tried to explain why I'd put these rules in place. I talked about the lack of notice, the constant disruptions, and the financial strain it was putting on me. I hoped she'd understand, maybe even show a bit of sympathy, but she just looked at me like I was speaking another language. To her, it didn't matter what my reasons were. All she saw was that I was turning my back on family. After a few minutes of back and forth, she suddenly suggested a family meeting to sort this out like adults. I agreed, thinking it might be a chance for everyone to finally understand where I was coming from. But the meeting turned into chaos. It felt less like a discussion and more like a venting session for everyone to unleash their frustrations on me. They threw around words like betrayal and selfish, while I tried to explain my side, but no one was really listening. My mom led the charge, making it clear that she thought I was in the wrong. And then one of my aunts chimed in, talking about the importance of staying together and how it was my duty to keep the family close. Amidst the yelling and accusations, I stayed firm. I repeated my boundaries calmly, even when they tried to guilt trip me. The tension in the room was thick, and I could feel everyone's frustration. But I wasn't backing down. I could tell they expected me to cave, but this time was different. I wasn't going to go back to being the open door host. Then, in a dramatic move, my mom issued an ultimatum. She told me that if I insisted on these rules, she would cut ties and wouldn't come over anymore. She delivered it like a final blow, expecting me to drop everything and apologize. But instead of folding, I just nodded and accepted it. Her face went from angry to shocked, and she fell silent. I think she was genuinely surprised that I didn't budge. Leading that meeting was exhausting. I could tell that my family was in disbelief, still hoping I'd come to my senses. But I wasn't going to change my mind. The rules were in place, and they weren't going anywhere. A few days later, one of my siblings hinted in a group text that they'd be dropping by anyway. It was clear they were testing my resolve, probably assuming I wouldn't actually turn them away if they showed up unannounced. I ignored the message, but my friends reminded me to stay strong, encouraging me not to give in. They'd been with me through the worst of it and kept saying I was doing the right thing, even if my family didn't see it that way. Eventually, I responded to the group chat, letting everyone know that the rules weren't changing. I kept it short and calm, saying that I was open to seeing everyone, as long as they followed the guidelines. It was a simple message, but it made my stance clear. Update 3. After the family meeting disaster, I thought the worst of it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Instead of backing off, some of my family took our conflict to social media. My siblings started posting cryptic messages that painted me as the black sheep who had turned against the family. They posted things like, "It's sad when people forget their roots and some people are too good for family now." They didn't mention my name, but it was obvious enough that even distant relatives began messaging me, wanting to know what was going on. A few extended family members, ones I hadn't heard from in years, reached out. Some of them tried to play mediator, saying things like, "I'm sure you didn't mean to hurt anyone," as if this whole thing was just a misunderstanding. Others outright scolded me, implying I was being disrespectful and selfish. My inbox filled up quickly with their messages, and the passive-aggressive comments on my siblings' posts just kept piling up. But then, something unexpected happened. Friends and acquaintances who caught wind of the situation started showing their support. They sent me private messages, reassuring me that setting boundaries wasn't wrong, and that family shouldn't feel entitled to my space. A few people even commented on my siblings' posts, subtly challenging the narrative they were pushing. Seeing those supportive messages helped, but it didn't stop the flood of negativity. All of this started to take a toll. The constant messages and guilt trips were exhausting. Every time I logged in, there was something new, a vague post, another message, a comment that made me feel like I was the villain. It was wearing me down. I could feel the stress piling up and knew I needed help to manage everything. So, I decided to start seeing a therapist, hoping to get some guidance on how to cope with this emotional mess and hold firm on my boundaries without feeling crushed by guilt. Around this time, my mom reached out again. She didn't call. She sent a long, carefully worded message, apologizing if she'd made me feel pressured. But she couldn't help slipping in that she thought the rules were too harsh and that I should consider easing up a bit for the sake of family harmony. It felt like an apology on the surface, but every line was laced with that same push to get me to backtrack. I took a deep breath and responded calmly, letting her know that the boundaries were staying as they were. During one of my therapy sessions, I talked through the whole situation and felt more resolved than ever. My therapist helped me see that these boundaries were necessary, and I wasn't wrong for wanting peace in my own home. That session gave me the confidence to stand my ground, even with the constant pressure from my family. Just when I thought things were settling down, another incident shook me. One evening, I heard someone fiddling with my front door. I looked out the window and saw one of my siblings trying to get in, using a hidden spare key that I used to keep outside. Fortunately, I had moved it to a new spot after the last visit, anticipating that something like this might happen. When they realized they couldn't get in, they started knocking, insisting I let them in to talk things out. I stood firm, telling them through the door that they needed to respect the boundaries and go home. When they wouldn't leave, I warned them that I'd call the police if they tried to enter my house again without permission. They finally left, but not without making a scene on their way out. Before driving off, they yelled that I was paranoid and overreacting. It was one of the most uncomfortable moments I'd had yet, and it made me realize that this situation was far from over. The next day, I took some drastic steps. I decided to officially disconnect from a few family members who had been the most disruptive. I blocked them on social media to cut off the stream of negativity. Seeing the constant posts and comments had become too much, and I needed a break from it all. I figured if they really needed to reach me, they'd have to go through other, more direct channels instead of blasting everything online. Interestingly, this move brought out some unexpected allies. A few family members who had experienced similar issues with boundaries reached out, sharing their stories and offering support. Some of them had cut ties or set limits with certain relatives, and hearing their stories made me feel less alone. I was surprised to learn that a few family members had gone through nearly identical situations and just hadn't spoken about it. After blocking the worst offenders and leaning on new allies, things finally started to calm down. There was an extended silence from my family that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The peace was surreal. I didn't have to worry about surprise visits. My phone wasn't blowing up with messages, and I could actually breathe in my own home. It was like I'd reclaimed my life, one small step at a time. In that quiet, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It was strange. Part of me felt a pang of sadness at the distance I'd created between myself and my family. But at the same time, I felt freer than I ever had before. I realized that I could still love my family without letting them take over my life. This wasn't about pushing them away. It was about protecting my peace. For the first time, I felt like I could move forward without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next uninvited guest would show up. Update 4. A few weeks after blocking certain family members and finding some much-needed peace, a handwritten letter arrived in the mail. I recognized my mom's handwriting right away. Inside, she'd written pages filled with memories from my childhood and all the sacrifices she'd made to keep the family together. She talked about the family trips, the holidays, and how proud she was to have raised us all so close-knit. She wrapped it up with an emotional plea to reconsider the rules, reminding me that family is all we have and asking if I'd really want to live without them. The letter brought a flood of guilt. I found myself staring at it, tempted to let things go back to how they were just to keep the peace. The nostalgia she'd packed into those pages was powerful, and for a moment I thought about caving. But at my next therapy session, I shared the letter, and my therapist helped me see the manipulation woven into it. We discussed how my mom was using the past to guilt me into dropping my boundaries, and with that perspective, I felt grounded again. In response to my silence, the family switched tactics. They organized a silent protest. Instead of reaching out directly, they filled social media with posts about family values and captions like "Some people just forget what matters most" under pictures of past family gatherings. Each post was like a jab, but I ignored it, determined not to react. Then, an older aunt who rarely gets involved reached out. She called to say she wanted to mediate and end this family feud. She pressed me to apologize, even saying I should think of my mother's health. She seemed convinced that I was the one causing all the stress. I listened but firmly held my ground, explaining that the boundaries were there to stay. She sighed, clearly disappointed, and hung up without another word. But things kept escalating. Soon after, I started hearing about rumors circulating among extended family. They were saying I'd become too good for the family, or that I was embarrassed by my background now that I was financially stable. These rumors even implied that I didn't want to associate with anyone beneath me. It was all absurd, but the stories kept coming. Friends who heard about it rallied around me, sharing stories of their own family boundary struggles. It was comforting to hear I wasn't alone, even if it didn't stop the rumors. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, I got a call from work informing me that someone had tried to cancel an upcoming presentation of mine, claiming to be me. They even went as far as to imitate my voice. I pieced together quickly who might have done it, and sure enough, it led back to one of my siblings. They'd somehow convinced themselves that sabotaging my work would teach me a lesson. This crossed a serious line, and I knew then that distance was absolutely necessary. I realized that part of the issue was the financial support I'd been providing to some family members. Over the years, I'd helped out whenever anyone needed a bit extra, loaning money here and there, covering bills, and even bailing a few out during rough times. Seeing the extent of the entitlement now, I made the decision to cut off financial support. It was hard, especially for those I'd made commitments to, but I knew this was the only way to truly get my message across. The backlash was immediate. A cousin who'd been somewhat supportive suddenly turned against me, claiming I'd forgotten where I came from and accusing me of abandoning the family when I'd made it. They said I owed it to the family to help them in return for all they'd done for me. I didn't respond, knowing that any explanation would only add fuel to the fire, but the accusation stung. In a final attempt to address everything with my mom, I called her. We had a frank conversation where I made it clear financial help was off the table, and the manipulation and guilt tripping had to stop. She sounded taken aback but didn't argue much, just sighed deeply and eventually said, "I guess this is just who you are now." I didn't respond to that. I knew any defense would just circle back to her disappointment. From that point, the family seemed to split into factions. Some relatives sided with my mom and siblings, holding tight to the idea that I was wrong for setting boundaries. But a few others showed quiet support, saying they understood why I needed space and encouraging me to stay strong. It was both strange and a bit reassuring to see the divide unfold, with people I hadn't expected voicing their approval of my decision. Around this time, I got a message from an uncle I hadn't heard from in years. He'd had similar issues with boundaries and had distanced himself from the family long before I ever thought about it. He shared his own story and told me not to let anyone make me feel guilty for doing what I needed for my own peace. It was a surprising message, but his words gave me a renewed sense of strength. Eventually, I decided to address the rumors head-on. I wrote a public post, not naming anyone but clarifying my reasons for setting boundaries. I explained that I needed space and privacy and that the choice wasn't about looking down on anyone but simply taking care of myself. The response was mixed, but at least I'd had my say. Despite everything, I started to feel a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life without letting my family dictate my happiness. The drama and backlash weren't over, but I could see the difference these boundaries were making. I was finally free from the constant demands and expectations, and while it came at a cost, I knew this was a step I should have taken long ago. Update 5. A few weeks after my public post, something unexpected happened. One of my siblings reached out with a simple message and apology. They admitted they hadn't realized the extent of the burden their frequent visits had placed on me. They said that all the online posts and back and forth had made them think about their behavior, and that they genuinely wanted to understand where I was coming from. This apology felt different. There was no guilt tripping, just an honest acknowledgement of my perspective. I replied, suggesting we meet up, but I set a few conditions. We'd meet somewhere neutral, and I wanted it to be a respectful conversation, without bringing up past arguments. They agreed, and we planned to get together the following weekend. Meanwhile, my mom wasn't ready to let things go. She doubled down on her ultimatum, saying that she would cut off contact if I continued to disrespect the family. This time, instead of getting anxious or defensive, I calmly told her I understood and accepted her decision. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. She didn't seem to know how to react and eventually ended the call abruptly. But a day later, she called again, this time with a different tone. She was emotional, and for the first time, I sensed a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen before. Taking this as an opportunity, I suggested we attend a therapy session together to try and work through some of the tension between us. I explained that it might help us have a neutral space to communicate without things getting heated. But she immediately turned down the idea, insisting that therapy wasn't necessary and blaming me for being too sensitive. I didn't push it further, realizing that she wasn't ready to meet me halfway in this way. After that call, I reached out to my siblings individually. I explained that while I loved them, the boundaries I'd set were staying in place. To my surprise, one sibling actually offered to support me in enforcing them. They even said they would help relay the rules to anyone in the family who had trouble understanding. This was a huge relief, knowing I'd have someone backing me up. Over time, I noticed certain family members slowly drifting away. Some who had always been close, like a few aunts and cousins, stopped reaching out altogether. At first, it felt strange, almost like a loss. But as the days went by, it became clear that this distance was freeing. I wasn't constantly bracing myself for passive-aggressive comments or unannounced visits. It was a quiet kind of liberation, and I welcomed it. Meanwhile, I noticed that more friends, and even some distant relatives who had followed the situation, reached out with words of encouragement. A few of them shared their own stories of setting boundaries, letting me know that they understood and respected my decision. Their messages were unexpected but gave me a sense of validation that I hadn't realized I needed. Without the weight of family drama constantly on my mind, I felt a renewed energy in my work. I poured myself into my projects and took on new responsibilities, which eventually led to a promotion. It felt like a personal win, not just because of the recognition, but because I was finally able to focus on my goals without constant distractions. One day, an old friend got in touch and invited me on a weekend trip. They'd noticed how much I'd been through and thought a change of scenery would do me good. I jumped at the chance, eager to celebrate this new chapter of independence. On that trip, I had a lot of time to reflect. I thought about my family's patterns, the way expectations had been piled on me without question, and the lessons I'd learned through setting boundaries. For the first time, I felt proud of myself for not giving in and for protecting my own peace. When I returned, I decided to host a small gathering with a few family members who had respected my space. I wanted to reconnect, but in a way that honored the boundaries I'd worked so hard to set. It was a simple, relaxed get-together, with no tension or drama, just easy conversation and laughter. Those who attended respected my rules, and for once, everything felt balanced. This gathering reminded me that I could still share moments with my family without compromising my own well-being. In the end, this journey taught me that I didn't have to sacrifice my peace for anyone. I could love my family and still keep my home as my sanctuary. And while not everyone understood my decision, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. Moving forward, I knew that my happiness and peace were worth standing up for, no matter what anyone else thought.